Judge Marisol Vega stepped onto the courthouse steps just after sunrise. The air still held a cool, gentle hush. She paused to straighten her black robe and smoothed her hair back. Her face was calm and her eyes showed quiet strength. Every morning, she greeted the metal gates with the same small nod, as if she were an honored guest entering a friend's home. Even the pigeons on the roof seemed to settle down when she walked by. Inside the grand building, polished floors shone. Under warm lights, clerks and bailiffs stood at attention, offering quick smiles and soft hellos. Everyone trusted Judge Vega's fairness. They knew she watched every case with a careful eye and listened to every word before she spoke. Outside the courtroom, a marble plaque bore her name. Many people wondered how she had come so far. When Marisol was a little girl, she lived in a small town on the edge of Georgia. Her mother sold tamales, and her father fixed old cars. Money was tight, but love filled their home. Marisol studied at a school where she was often the only child of color in her class. At first, she felt small and unsure. When she stood up to help a classmate who faced mean jokes, she felt a spark inside her chest. That spark grew brighter. Each year, books became her refuge. She read stories about brave leaders, about people who fought wrong because they believed in right. She promised herself she would be a safe place for others who felt lost or afraid. Years later, Marisol earned top honors in college and then in law school. She worked as a public defender, helping people many had already given up on. Late nights passed in her office while she listened to clients who spoke about lost jobs and broken homes. She never judged them. Instead, she learned their names, their fears, their hopes. The day she was chosen as a judge felt like a promise kept. In this grand courthouse, she carried those early lessons close to her heart. In her chambers, portraits of former judges lined the walls. She looked at them sometimes, as though they spoke wisdom to her across time. She carried a heavy-duty one that she took seriously. Every decision affected lives. Every word she spoke mattered. Judge Vega often stayed after court to meet young attorneys. She saw herself in their eager eyes. She showed them how to write fair arguments and how to treat every person with respect, no matter their background. She told them, justice is a human act. It is not in books alone. They listened like students at a bright fire. Some were the first in their families to go to law school. She believed in lifting others up. At a local community center, she held free legal clinics. Families who had never set foot in a courtroom came to her for help. She listened to stories of unfair evictions, of children lost in broken foster systems, of workers who faced cruel bosses. She spoke in clear, simple words, making each person feel heard and safe. Yet not everyone welcomed her kindness. In the police department next door, some officers remembered her strict ruling in a civil rights case. 2 years ago, she had found that officers had used too much force against a black man during a traffic stop. The city paid a fine, and the officers faced reprimands. Many in the force whispered that she had hurt their reputation. They believed she had sided with one side unfairly, though Marisol had only followed the law. Over time, their anger turned bitter. At secret gatherings, they told jokes that stung with hidden hatred. They called each other names behind closed doors. They believed their job was tough and that they deserved more respect than a judge could offer. Even after hours in dimly lit rooms, their prejudice seeped into every word. One morning, Sergeant Jackson Reed stood near the station's coffee machine, his face hard and tense. He had served for 15 years and climbed the ranks. He knew how to give orders and how to take them. But when he looked at Judge Vega's picture in the newspaper, his chest tightened. He felt he had lost something because of her ruling. Blamed her for what he saw as the department's shame. He whispered to a fellow officer, "What if we could teach her a lesson? What if we showed everyone she is no better than us?" The idea felt dangerous, but Reed held it close to his chest. He watched Marisol's courthouse every day, noting her car at the curb, listening to her routine. Reed added more people too. His plan, choosing officers who owed him favors. He spoke softly, lowering his voice as they crowded around him in a narrow hallway. They leaned in, drawn by his promise of power. If they could undercut her name, they would rise together. would earn promotions and respect. They would show the city that no judge, no matter how kind, could stand in their way. In the dark corners of that station, they began to whisper about planting evidence, about twisting facts. Fear and excitement rose in equal measure. None spoke the truth of what they felt. They only spoke of hatred, of revenge. As Reed and his small group plotted, Judge Vega walked into her chambers to prepare for the day's first case. She reached for her papers, her mind already running through arguments in her head. She thought about the young man before her soon, accused of a small theft. He was scared and alone. She would remind him that mistakes did not define him. She would offer him a fair chance. In her heart, Marisol believed that the law could heal, as well as punish. Crosstown, hidden plans took shape, but she remained unaware. Her morning light touched the wood panels of the courtroom, and she took a deep breath, ready for another day of honest work. She did not know the storm gathering just beyond her door, but she would face it with the same steady courage she had shown all her life. Reed waited until the station buzz had died down. The overhead lights flickered above the rows of desks, and the hum of computers filled the air. He walked over to where Officer White leaned back in her chair, scrolling through social media on her phone. White was fresh from the academy, eager to prove herself. She still believed in doing what was right, but she worried about making mistakes that would cost her the job she had worked so hard to earn. Reed leaned in close, lowering his voice until only she could hear. White said, "You ever feel that Judge Vega isn't on our side? That she's making us look bad?" He tapped the nameplate on her desk. "She ruled against us 2 years ago. That cost us a big case. We lost respect, and don't think the chief forgot." White's eyes flicked up, uncertain. "I know you're new," he continued, "but I can help you move up fast. Want to get ahead?" He paused so she could think. "Let me remind that. Judge that cops run this city." White swallowed hard. She liked Reed's easy smile and confident tone. She admired his rank and the way other officers listened when he spoke. She nodded, almost without thinking. "Okay," she whispered. "What do you need me to do?" Next, Reed found Turner alone in the evidence locker. Papers and files lay stacked on metal shelves around him. Turner was quiet, the kind of officer who kept his head down and did his work without complaint. Yet he also felt lost at times, unsure if he had chosen the right path when he signed on. Reed watched him slip a file back into place and speak softly. "Turner, I know you've got what it takes. You've done good work. But if you really want to move ahead, if you want to feel people respect your badge, you'll help me. Vega needs to learn she can't cross us." Turner nodded, though guilt flickered in his eyes. "What do we do?" he asked in a small voice. Reed smiled as if sharing a secret. He laid out the plan in simple steps. First, they would learn the judge's routine. They would watch where she parked her car, which coffee shop she liked, when she jogged near the park, where she ate lunch. Then, one night, they would plant evidence-legal drugs and fake financial records in her car. They would tip off Internal Affairs with an anonymous message, claiming they had uncovered proof of her corruption. The agents would rush in, convinced they had the goods on a respected federal judge. It would ruin her reputation. It would show everyone that cops had the true power. White and Turner listened in silence. The words felt heavy in their mouths. White thought of the stories she read in the news about honest officers protecting communities. This did not feel like that. Yet Reed's promise of promotions and praise tempted her mind. Turner's heart beat fast as he thought of his family and the pressure to do well. He knew this was wrong, yet he feared saying no. He nodded, his face pale. Over the next days, the three officers watched Judge Vega's every move. Red sent photos from his phone. White drove past the courthouse in plain clothes and noted the license plate of the judge's white sedan. Turner checked patrol cameras, pausing footage at the coffee shop where she drank a latte each morning. They learned that she jogged in the park at 6 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that she often ate a sandwich at a small deli at midday. They even observed her Sunday afternoons at the community center, where she volunteered legal advice to families in need. They whispered in corners of the station, careful not to let anyone overhear. Reed kept the plan simple. We hit her car first. Then, We hid her case files. We need proof she took money. It's all false, but Internal Affairs won't know that. They'll run with it. White felt sick as she typed an anonymous email. On a station computer, forging details of a secret account with wired cash in her name, Turner printed fake bank statements, making certain the numbers matched real serial codes. They copied them onto official letterhead. Using a station printer to add a stamp that looked convincing, one night, when the streets lay quiet, Reed parked his cruiser across from the judge's home. White sat in the passenger seat, her face lit only by dashboard lights. Turner hovered behind the judge's car, his breathing shallow. 3 officers moved swiftly, almost without speaking. White slipped a small bag of white powder into the glove box. Turner placed a stack of fake cash records in the center console. Reed cut open the sealed envelope holding confidential case notes and placed them in the trunk. Their actions felt like breathing automatic, familiar, yet wrong. As they retreated, Reed whispered, "We did it. Now Internal Affairs will find this in the morning." They drove back to the station, each officer's heart pounding in a different rhythm. Reed wore a look of grim triumph. White stared at her lap, tears threatening. Turner's eyes darted around as if expecting the judge herself to step from the shadows and catch them in the act. No sirens came. No one chased them. They reached the station and hurried inside, shoving the bag evidence into an evidence locker and uploading the forged records into an anonymous tip system. Before dawn, Internal Affairs agents arrived at the judge's home. They knocked on her front door. With badges held high, outside, early birds at the coffee shop watched as agents searched the white sedan and placed brown paper bags in evidence boxes. Inside the house, the judge's husband answered the door, confusion clouding his face. "What's going on?" he asked. "We've received credible evidence of illegal substances and bribery," an agent said, voice professional but firm. "Ma'am, we'll need to bring your car in for further inspection." By the time Judge Vega arrived at the station, her morning calm had shattered. She stood outside the impound lot, arms crossed, staring at her car nestled among other seized vehicles. The agent showed her the small bag they found in the glove box, the forged bank statements and case documents. She held the bag in her gloved hand and felt a flicker of anger, followed by a deep sadness. "This isn't mine," she said quietly. "Someone is setting me up." Inside, the news spread like wildfire. Reporter tweets glowed on every screen. Federal judge in scandal, drug charges, rock Atlanta courthouse. Court staff whispered in hallways. Friends called her office, voices tight with worry. She left messages answering questions, but she knew that rumors would run ahead of facts. Her name, once spoken with respect, now mingled with accusations of corruption. In her chambers, she sat alone at her desk. The morning light softer now as it filtered through tall windows. She thought of her family, of her mother's proud smile, and her father's gentle nod. She thought of the communities she had served, of the young attorneys she had guided. She closed her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. She would fight. She would prove her innocence. She would show that truth. And justice were stronger than lies. Across the city, Reed, White, and Turner watched the news reports from the safety of the station. Reed's grin faded as he heard the judge's statement in a live broadcast. "I am confident that a full investigation will reveal the truth. I have devoted my life to the law. I will not let false evidence destroy my integrity." The agents had no way yet to trace the forged tip back to the station. Yet Reed felt a tremor of fear ripple through him. White's bravado cracked as she turned away from the TV, fingers shaking. Turner stared at his own reflection in the darkened screen, seeing guilt and shame instead of the officer he once knew. That evening, as the city lights blinked on, Marisol Vega sat with her clerk, reviewing her calendar and planning her defense. She would call her friend, U.S. Attorney David Chen, in the morning. She would gather every scrap of evidence, every record that proved her innocence, and she would face whatever storm came with the same steady courage. She had shown all her life. Unaware of how far the conspiracy would go, she closed her briefcase and walked out of the office into the cool night air. She breathed deeply, trusting That truth would light the wave in the darkest hour. The news of Judge Viga's alleged wrongdoing spread quickly through the city. Television crews parked outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on the grand stone building. Reporters whispered into microphones, voices low but urgent. Federal. Judge under scrutiny, one banner blared. Marisol Vega walked into the hallway with her usual calm, but her heart felt heavy. She offered her clerk a reassuring nod, even as she worried what new twist might lie ahead. Inside the Internal Affairs office, Special Agent Maria Lopez paced among rows of desks. She'd been on the force for 8 years and believed in truth. Above all, when the anonymous tip arrived claiming the judge had drugs in her car and took secret payments, Lopez thought it sounded odd, but she knew she had to follow every lead. Now, her team held the small bag of powder found in the glove box, along with the bank statements and case files. They ran every test they could. Forensic chemists examined the powder, digital experts traced the emails, and document analysts compared the statements to known records. The chemists reported first. Under bright lights, they tested the white powder. The results came back in neat writing on a paper slip. "This is baking soda." Lopez frowned. Baking soda was not an illegal substance. It meant someone wanted them to believe it was something else. She called the car's towing yard and asked for the judge's fingerprints. They came back quickly. The only prints on the bag matched someone named Jackson Rita, sergeant in the local police department. Lopez's eyes widened. She had suspected something, but seeing Reed's name on the receipt made the case personal. Meanwhile, the digital team focused on the bank statements. The forged documents bore a station stamp and a note that said confidential. But the timestamps showed they were printed at midnight long after the station's usual hours. Security cameras in the printing room had picked up movement at that time. 3 shapes huddled around the printer. Agent Lopez watched the grainy footage and recognized the uniforms of Reed, White, and Turner. There they were, bending over the machine, each face unreadable in the dim light. It was proof that the judge could not have created those papers herself. Lopez tapped her notebook. "We need to bring these officers in for questioning," she told her team. They moved fast, drafting subpoenas and arranging interviews. The goal was clear: find out who planted the evidence and why. They knew the judge had a spotless reputation. Her record was cleaner than most. Something did not add up. Back at the courthouse, Marisol Vega sat in her chambers, leafing through case files for the afternoon session. She wore her robe as if it were a second skin. She had learned to stay strong under pressure. Her clerk knocked softly. "Ma'am, Internal Affairs wants to speak with you again," he said, handing her a small folder. Inside were test results and the chemist's report. Baking soda. She breathed out slowly. "They found it was not a drug," she murmured. Relief and worry stirred together. Relief because the substance was harmless. Worry because the false accusations still stood in. Someone had tried to make her look guilty. She closed the folder and made her call. Within minutes, U.S. Attorney David Chen arrived at her office. He was tall and kind-faced, with a reputation for thoroughness. "Marisol, I've seen the reports," he said quietly. "This looks like a setup." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "We'll clear your name, I promise." She offered him a small smile. "Thank you, David. I believe in you." He nodded and left her to gather her own evidence. Across town, Reed's confident Facade began to crack. He sat in his cruiser. During a late-night shift, staring at the dashboard, the radio crackled with static. Normally, he would ignore it. Tonight, he heard his name mentioned by officers gossiping about the investigation. "They've got his prints," one voice said. "Looks bad for Reed." Reed's jaw tightened. He thought of White and Turner, 2 officers he had pulled into his plan. Now they faced trouble, and so did he. He scrolled through his phone, finding photos of the judge's routine. He considered deleting them, but deleting would leave a digital trail. He froze, unsure what to do next. White sat in her small apartment, the television on but muted. She stared at a sandwich wrapper on the coffee table. The image of the judge, calm and dignified, flashed on the screen. Earlier, she had seen the chemist's report. baking soda. The news anchor said that Internal Affairs suspected a cover-up. White felt a sting of guilt. She thought back to the night she planted the bag in the glove box. She remembered Turner's pale face. She remembered Reed's sharp whisper, "This will teach her a lesson." Now she saw the terror in Judge Vega's eyes. She had never imagined a real person would suffer because of their plan. White reached for her coat. She needed to go to the station to speak with Lopez. To tell the truth, Turner drove slowly through quiet streets, the city lights reflecting on his windshield. He had been on the force for 3 years, long enough to see good men and women do hard work for the right reasons. He had believed that his badge meant service and honor. But Reed's promise of quick promotion had tempted him, as it had tempted White. He shook his head. "What have I done?" he whispered. He pulled his cruiser into the station's parking. Lawton sat for a moment, gathering courage. He knew he must come clean. The next morning, all 3 officers arrived at Internal Affairs around the same time. Lopez greeted them with a firm look. "Sit down," she said. They obeyed, facing each other across the long table. Reed held White's gaze, but his own eyes were wary. Turner sat quietly, his hands folded. Lopez laid out the evidence: fingerprints, time stamps, surveillance footage, chemist's report. She spoke slowly, watching their faces. "The evidence shows that someone wanted to frame Judge Vega. We traced key items back to this station. I want to know who gave the order." Reed swallowed. His neck tight? White glanced down at her hands. Turner's shoulders shook. They each waited for someone else to speak. Silence filled the room like a slow tide. Finally, Turner looked up. His voice trembled. I was there," he said. "Helped plant the evidence." His words hung in the air. White took a deep breath and added, "I did it too, I'm sorry." Reed sat back, eyes flashing. Lopez turned to him. "Sergeant Reed, do you want to tell us your part?" Reed's mouth opened, then closed. The weight of guilt pressed on him. He closed his eyes and spoke in a low voice. "I ordered it," he admitted. "I thought she needed to be taught a lesson." He looked at the judge's name on the folder in front of him as if it glowed. "I was wrong." Lopez nodded, recording every word. She asked follow-up questions, giving each officer the chance to explain their actions. White said she felt pressured. Turner said he regretted his choice. Reed said he acted out of anger. None could undo what they had done, but they knew they had to face the consequences. Lopez stood and closed her notebook. "Thank you for telling the truth," she said. "This will help Judge Vega and the department." She left them in the room as the door clicked shut. Back at the courthouse, Marisol Vega prepared for her afternoon session. She felt a quiet relief knowing the officers had confessed. She stood before her mirror in chambers and smoothed her robe. "Truth wins," she whispered. She gathered her papers and walked to the courtroom, her steps sure and steady. Out the hallway, her clerk handed her an envelope. Inside was a note from U.S. Attorney Chen. "Evidence at Internal Affairs confirms your innocence. We move to dismiss charges." She folded the note, relief and gratitude warm in her chest. In the courtroom, people waited. Reporters sat in the gallery, pens poised. Lawyers stood by their tables. Judge Vega entered, the gavel in her hand. She looked out at the room and saw hopeful faces. She raised her gavel and spoke. "This court finds the charges against me baseless. All accusations are dismissed." A hush fell. Then applause rose quietly. She lowered her gaze and offered thanks to the court staff. Outside, Reed, White, and Turner faced departmental hearings. They each knew their careers were over. Reed would lose his rank. White and Turner might avoid prison, but they would bear marks on their records forever. They watched as Judge Vega left the courtroom, her head held high. Turner felt tears in his eyes. He thought of the harm he had caused and hoped she might forgive them one day. As the sun set, the city lights shone. Again, Judge Vega walked to her car, met by Assistant Chen. He smiled. "You were right," he said. "Justice does prevail." She returned his smile and closed the car door. In her heart, she carried the lesson that truth, kindness, and perseverance can overcome the darkest plots even when they come from those sworn to protect. The morning light seeped through the blinds as Sergeant Jackson Reed sat alone in the small interrogation room at Internal Affairs. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. His uniform hung loosely on his shoulders, and his badge felt heavy against his chest. Across the table sat Special Agent Maria Lopez, her notebook open. She looked at Reed steadily, waiting for him to speak. He had already heard Turner and White confess the entire plot. Now it was his turn. Reed swallowed hard. He thought of Judge Viga's calm eyes when she saw the planted bag, of her quiet words. "Someone is setting me up." He remembered the anger that had driven him at the time, the sharp sense that she had humiliated the police department with her ruling. He had imagined ruining her in return, thought it would make him powerful. Now he felt small and ashamed. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and spoke. "I lied when I said I had proof of her corruption," he said, voice low. "I ordered White and Turner to plant the evidence. I thought I was doing the right thing for the department, but I was wrong." Lopez nodded and scribbled his words. "Why?" she asked gently. "Why did you think this was right?" Reed stared at the table, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm. "I felt we lost respect when she ruled against us," he said. "I thought if we could damage her reputation, we'd show that cops run. This city, I wanted to feel respected again." He paused. "I didn't think about the damage it would do to her life and the trust people place in the law." Lopez closed her notebook and leaned back. "You had a choice, Sergeant Reed," she said. "You could have appealed her ruling. You could have spoken up. Instead, you used lies and planted false evidence." Reed swallowed, the guilt rising in his throat. "I know," he whispered. "I'm ready to face the consequences later." That day, Reed, White, and Turner were escorted into a larger hearing room inside the police headquarters. Superiors, internal affairs officers, and union representatives filled the benches. The three officers stood in front of a long table, facing Chief Daniels, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair. She looked at each of them in turn. "Sergeant Reed," she said, "your actions have betrayed everything this badge stands for. You intentionally tried to destroy the career of an innocent federal judge." Reed's shoulders slumped under her words. Next, she turned to Officer White. White's eyes were red. She clasped and unclasped her hands. "Officer White, you followed an unlawful order and participated in planting evidence. You should have refused." White's voice trembled. "I'm sorry," she said. "I knew it was wrong the moment I did it. I was afraid of Jackson Reed. He promised I'd be promoted." Chief Daniels' gaze was steady. "Fear is not an excuse for breaking the law," she said. Finally, the chief looked at Turner. Turner's head was bowed, his uniform neat but his tie slightly loose. "Officer Turner," the chief said, "you knew this was wrong, and you did it anyway." Turner looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice small. "I should have said no." Chief Daniels nodded. "The department will recommend punitive action to the commission. You three will face termination at minimum. Further charges may follow." Outside the hearing room, press photographers and reporters crowded the lobby. Cameras flashed as Reed, White, and Turner were led out in handcuffs. Each step echoed like a drumbeat. The officers lowered their heads, faces flushed. Guards guided them to waiting vehicles that would take them to pretrial detention. As they passed, a group of young cadets watched in stunned silence. The image of three officers who once served the same goal, protecting the community, had become a cautionary tale. In the afternoon sun, Judge Vega stood in her private chambers, reviewing a speech she would give at a community law forum the next day. She paused as her phone buzzed. It was a message from U.S. Attorney David Chen. "The department has reported the officer confessions. Everything moves forward now." Relief washed over her. She thought of Reed, Turner, and White not as enemies, but as people who had made terrible mistakes. She believed in mercy, but she also knew justice required accountability. That evening, media outlets ran headlines. "Racist plot exposed. Cops admit framing federal judge." And 3 officers under arrest in Judge Vega case. Community leaders reacted on social media. Some praised Judge Vega's perseverance. Others called for broader reform in the department. A local civil rights group organized a candlelight vigil in front of the courthouse for the next day. They invited Judge Vega to speak about justice, truth, and healing. At the vigil, hundreds gathered under the glow of street lamps. They held candles and signs that read "Justice for all" and "Trust the law." Marisol Vega stepped onto a small, portable stage. Her robe was folded in her arms, replaced by a simple blazer. She looked out at the sea of faces, men and women, black and white, young and old. She deserved the moment of peace she had earned. She began softly, "Thank you for being here tonight." Her voice carried across the silent crowd. "These past weeks have tested me, tested our city's trust in the law." She paused, letting her words settle. "But tonight we stand together to renew that trust. When false evidence tried to break our faith, we held on to truth." She spoke of the importance of fairness in law enforcement, of the need to root out bias, and of forgiveness. She said, "No one is above the law, neither judge nor officer. We must hold each other accountable, with kindness and the firm hand of justice." As she spoke, the candles flickered in the warm breeze. Tears glistened on some faces. When she finished, the crowd broke into applause, not loud and raucous, but deep and heartfelt. A sense of unity filled the air. Volunteers passed out hot cocoa and blankets. Neighbors talked quietly, sharing stories of how Judge Vega's clinics had helped them. A local pastor offered a prayer for healing, asking that the city learn from its wounds and become stronger. Meanwhile, in pretrial detention, Reed lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling. The small cell felt colder than the courthouse, he thought. About Judge Vega's words about truth and accountability. Regretted every moment he had plotted against her. Wondered if he could ever regain his honor. Tears slipped down his cheeks as he replayed the vigil's words in his mind. He knew forgiveness might someday be possible, but only after he paid for his crimes. Officer White, in another cell, wrote a letter to Judge Vega. She told her how sorry she was, how guilty she felt for harming someone she respected. She asked for forgiveness, even though she didn't know if it would ever come. Turner, in his cell, wrote a similar letter, spilling out his regret and his hope to make amends by speaking out for justice whenever he learned more about the law. The next morning, the news cycle reported on the vigil and the letters. Community. Leaders shared stories of new bias training programs being introduced in the police department. And city council members debated stronger civilian oversight. Judge Vega returned to her courtroom, her gavel ready. She presided over hearings with renewed purpose, determined that every case, every person, would be treated with respect. Months later, at the sentencing hearing, Reed White and Turner stood before a judge. They faced charges of conspiracy, obstruction, and civil rights violations. Reed received a sentence that included prison time. White and Turner were given opportunities for reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation and public service. Commitments in law enforcement reform. As the judge pronounced the sentences, Judge Vega watched from the gallery. She felt sorrow, but also hope that even broken officers could be rebuilt through accountability and service. As the hearing ended, Judge Vega stepped outside into bright sunlight. She took a deep breath of summer air. She carried no gavel. Now, just her conscience. She knew that justice did not end with punishment. It began with truth, fairness, and the chance to make things right. And in that city, under her watch, justice had been restored and healing had begun. The morning light seeped through the blinds as Sergeant Jackson Reed sat alone in the small interrogation room at Internal Affairs. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. His uniform hung loosely on his shoulders and his badge felt heavy against his chest. Across the table sat Special Agent Maria Lopez, her notebook open. She looked at Reed steadily, waiting for him to speak. He had already heard Turner and White confess the entire plot. Now it was his turn. Reed swallowed hard. He thought of Judge Vega's calm eyes when she saw the planted bag of her quiet words. Someone is setting me up. He remembered the anger that had driven him at the time, the sharp sense that she had humiliated the police department with her ruling. He had imagined ruining her in return, thought it would make him powerful. Now he felt small and ashamed. He closed his eyes. for a moment, then opened them and spoke. "I lied when I said I had proof of her corruption," he said, voice low. "I ordered White and Turner to plant the evidence. I thought I was doing the right thing for the department, but I was wrong." Lopez nodded and scribbled his words. "Why?" she asked gently. "Why did you think this was right?" Reed stared at the table, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm. "I felt we lost respect when she ruled against us," he said. "I thought if we could damage her reputation, we'd show that cops run. This city, I wanted to feel respected again." He paused. "I didn't think about the damage it would do to her life and the trust people place in the law." Lopez closed her notebook and leaned back. "I did a choice, Serge." Months later, spring flowers bloomed along the courthouse steps. Judge Marisol Vega stood before the grand doors, dressed in a simple gray suit. She carried a small stack of papers notes for a speech she would give at a national law conference. As she walked inside, she thought back on all that had happened. She remembered the fear when false evidence tried to destroy her. She remembered the long days of investigation and the courage it took for officers Turner and White to confess. And she remembered Reed's final words before his sentence, that he hoped someday to earn back some measure of trust. In the gallery, that morning, family members of the three former officers sat quietly. Officer White's younger sister held her hand, tears in both their eyes. Turner's wife and children waited with hope and worry. Sergeant Reed's mother, though she no longer wore his old police uniform, had come to show love for her son. They all watched as Judge Vega took the bench to oversee the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was still. Reed stood first, before the judge. He no longer wore a uniform, but the shape of his shoulders and the weight of his head betrayed his guilt. The judge spoke in her clear, calm voice. "Sergeant Jackson Reed, you betrayed your oath and tried to harm the public's trust in our justice system. You will serve 2 years in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, during which you will mentor young officers in the dangers of bias." Reed nodded, tears in his eyes. He said, "Thank you, Your Honor," and turned to leave. The courtroom next came Officer White. She had no prior record other than her brief participation in the plot. The judge offered her a chance to give back. "Officer Emily White, you will serve 6 months in a diversion program. Afterwards, you will work with community groups to teach young people about building trust with law enforcement." White's voice trembled as she said, "I will do everything I can, Your Honor." Turner stood last. He too would enter a diversion program. His community service would include working in youth centers and speaking at schools about making the right choices. When Judge Vega read his sentence, she looked into his eyes. "Officer Marcus Turner, you have shown remorse and honesty. Use this chance to help others choose the path of integrity." Turner's head bowed and he whispered, "I will, Judge Vega." After the hearing, reporters waited in the foyer. They asked Judge Vega about her decision. She turned to them and said, "Justice means accountability and also the chance to learn from our mistakes. These officers will face the consequences, but they will also have a path to rebuild trust." Her words spread quickly through news. Wires reminding everyone that justice could be both firm and fair. Outside, the city felt different. Neighbors spoke of the new bias training in the police department. City Council had passed a law requiring all officers to attend workshops on fairness and to face civilian reviews for serious complaints. A community advisory board met each month with police leaders and city officials. Turner and White's families volunteered at those meetings, sharing their hope that such programs would prevent future harms. At the community center, where Judge Vega once volunteered, a bronze plaque now hung on the wall. It read, "In honor of Judge Marisol Vega, whose courage and fairness strengthened our city." Families passed by, reading the words and nodding in respect. Young attorneys still came to her pro bono clinics where she gave free legal advice. She had expanded those clinics, adding classes on knowing your rights and conflict resolution skills. The small room where she once sat now buzzed with people seeking help. One afternoon, Turner and White arrived at the center together. They carried boxes of donated school supplies and snacks. They approached the reception desk and introduced themselves. "We're here to volunteer," Turner said, voice steady. White added, "We want to help young people learn about making Good choices. The staff welcomed them, and they spent the day sorting books and arranging chairs for an after-school program. Some kids smiled at them, others looked away. But each time Turner or White spoke kindly, a child's face lit up. Reed, serving his sentence at a nearby facility, wrote letters each week to organizations fighting bias in law enforcement. He also sent notes to Judge Vega, apologizing again, and describing the work he did to mentor new inmates and understanding how prejudice can hurt everyone. Vega received those letters and sent brief replies, encouraging him to keep working toward change. At a national conference on justice reform, Marisol Vega took the stage before hundreds of judges, lawyers, and police leaders. She spoke of her ordeal and the lessons it held. When trust is broken, we rebuild it by showing fairness, by listening, by giving those who are a chance to learn, she told them. She described the reforms in her city: bias training workshops, community oversight boards, and programs that brought officers and civilians together in shared tasks. The audience listened, rapt, and moved. After her speech, a young officer approached her. He was nervous, but determined. "Your Honor, my department is small, but we want to start programs like yours. Could you guide us?" She smiled and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Reach out anytime. We're all working toward the same goal. Justice that heals." Back in her chambers, Vega placed a photo on her desk. It showed her standing with Turner, White, and community leaders at the vigil months before. They all held candles, their faces glowing in soft light. She remembered the warmth of that night, how people came together. She hoped that image would remind everyone, judge, officer, or citizen, that even after the darkest moments, light could return. In the quiet that evening, she walked home through tree-lined streets. The sky had turned pink and orange, and lovers strolled hand in hand. She saw Turner and White outside the community center again, teaching kids how to play soccer safely. She saw officers carrying groceries for elderly neighbors as part of a new outreach. She saw families chatting on front porches, trusting that the law would protect them. Marisol Vega paused in the middle of the sidewalk. She took a deep breath and smiled. She had weathered the worst false accusations, betrayal by those sworn to serve, public doubt. And through it all, she had held fast to truth and kindness. She knew challenges would come again, but she also knew that in her city, justice was a living thing, one that needed careful tending, fair hearts, and second chances. As she reached her front door, she felt grateful, not just for her cleared name, but for the chance to help build a system where everyone, even those who faltered, could find a path back to respect. She stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her, and set her speech notes on the table. In the stillness of her home, she whispered a simple thanks to justice. To those who spoke the truth, and to a community that refused to,